which gets to the heart of rewilding, in that it was addressing fear. And I think that was my life, was learning how to be thrown in very scary situations, very unfamiliar, all that kind of stuff, and yet still being able to find myself. And so that's what rewilding is to me. It's like I'm having a conversation with the world now. It's not just who I feel safe with. It's opening myself up to not only internally who I am, but externally with other people, but also with the rest of the world, which is a lot bigger than people, let me tell you.
Hello and welcome. As always, I'm Abbie. This is Stories Lived, Stories Told. And today, I invite you to join me in conversation with Mark Edwards as we take a communication perspective on rewilding. To take a communication perspective is to consider what we're making and how we're making it through our communication practices. This means that we look closely at patterns, context, stories, and relationships, and that we use curiosity, mindfulness, collaboration, and dialogue to create better social worlds. Whether the topic of today's conversation is familiar to you or not, the hope is that using a communication perspective will reveal new ways of seeing and being. At the top of the episode, you heard our conversation partner today, Mark Edwards. Mark is a naturalist on a mission to rewild. He is a leader with Be Wild Rewild and its Big River Connectivity Project. He also worked for the Iowa Department of Natural Resources for 30 years, where he led restoration efforts across the state. Today's conversation with Mark is kicking off our next series. I'm calling this the Sustainability Series. And when I say that, I want you to think about what sustainability really means. On one level, I imagine we all recognize the connection the word has to conservation efforts, conversations about being environmentally friendly, and addressing issues like climate change. But when we break it down, the word literally means the ability to sustain. Sustainability, to carry on, to continue in a certain manner. And the question of sustainability is a really important one. It matters that we ask ourselves, are our practices, are our ways of being sustainable as it relates to ourselves and our own well-being, but also to the earth and to non-human beings as well. In this conversation, Mark is going to teach us about rewilding specifically, which is the process of restoring usually land back to its natural, uncultivated state. But as we're going to hear today, it means a lot more than that to Mark, and truthfully, he's still figuring it out. So let's start the conversation with Mark. Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today. I'm really looking forward to it.
I'm just so excited, Abbie, to have the opportunity to have a conversation about this topic, because I think it's so important.
Yes, I think it's important too. And I do not know about it as much as you do. So I'm excited to learn from you today and, hope that I can contribute some to this conversation too, with my perspective. And I think we'll create something really cool. To start, can you share a little bit about yourself? Help us to get to know you. Tell us your story a little bit. Yeah.
Well, let's see. Like I say, I'm 76 years old. It's a long story. So I'm trying to present it in a way that will facilitate the discussion about this, what rewilding means. And I think, at first I need to clarify that I'm still don't know what it means. I'm still looking into exploring that. And I do that, the exploration with other people and with other beings out there. So that's my history, and my story is going to explain that to some degree, I hope. Mm-hmm. So it starts out, I guess I did a presentation for Audubon here not too long ago, and they're bird oriented, so I was thinking in terms of bird, and then I went back to I remember my parents were like factory workers in Indianapolis. And so on the weekends, they would escape and we would drive out into the countryside, and I was the firstborn, and so they would get me out there and we'd go look at cows and stuff. But my mother would always tell me, oh, your first word was bird, because I'd see these things moving by, and so I have a thing with birds that I listen to. And so from that, then on that level of our human level, my dad joined into the military and went off to war. And that meant we moved immediately from that area. We moved over to California, And then I think after about a year and a half, we moved to New Mexico. And then after that, a few years, we moved to Texas. And so we were constantly moved every year or two. The longest place I've ever been was 3 years before I got here. And so that exposure to these various cultures, because when we were in Texas, we were at the very southern tip of Texas. So we had a lot of exposure to that culture and to those languages and stuff, which, of course, I didn't really understand on some levels, but I ended up playing with kids. And so we had to learn to communicate, even though we didn't understand the languages so much. And so that kind of continued on. And then, going to various steps there anyway, but I could do all bird stories everywhere we learned because that's where I kept connecting through birds. But we moved to Florida. My father went to college in Tallahassee to further his education. And in that point, that's when I started getting a little bit more freedom to run out there. And so I'd climb trees, and then I'd have these bird experiences in the trees and stuff with the birds. And so then we go on and we moved to Florida. Then my grandparents moved there. So we had a long-term connection to there because every time we'd move, we'd come back to go visit the grandparents. And so that was Florida. And so that was kind of a base in a way for me. And then we moved to Japan, and that was in my junior high years. And so that was a large military school, hundreds of people, and kind of a lot different than what I was used to because smaller schools locally and stuff. And so we ended up there going out, living out in what's called the rice paddies. And so we lived off base. And, I ended up playing a lot with Japanese people, which couldn't understand in a way and everything. But we learned to share things. You just do that. And so I felt really fortunate that way. And there was all kind of different bird stuff going on there. And so that was I really appreciated my parents, no matter what. They were really good about getting us outdoors and going places and not afraid to jump out into the world. And at that time, give you one example, I used to have to ride the train. I'd ride the train into downtown Tokyo, and I'd go to the dentist. And I'd do that by myself, and I'd be walking through crowds of hundreds of Japanese people, anti-American, screaming, yelling, anti-American stuff. And I never once felt threatened ever there. I mean, it was just a whole different society way of relating and politeness and taking care of. It was just really affected my life. And so then at that time, I was kind of getting in trouble in that I was not happy with being moving all the time. You couldn't keep any friends. You move, you end up with friends that a little scary, because they're a little disconnected from everything too. And so you ended up getting in trouble and doing things I regret and things like that. And so that was a big change in my life. And right when things were really coming to a head of, I hate everything. I hate my parents, all that kind of stuff. And then we moved to Sergeant Bluff in Iowa, which is on the Missouri River. Graduating class was 32 people. So, and most of them were farming, small town business people, not used to military brats, as we were called. So, and you try to integrate in and everything, but it was extremely hard. And so that was a chance for me to kind of disconnect again. And so when I could disconnect, I would run up into the hills, into the prairie, and where there weren't people. And I'd go up in there, and that's where I really started getting to relating to that other world besides humans, because I'd just been so immersed in that human world. And it was always a struggle in a lot of ways. But boy, once I got up in those hills, I'm skipping school. That's where I want to go. I'm trying to learn how to trap, which is horrible. How to hunt. I really didn't like hunting, but you're just experimenting with all these outdoor things that we traditionally think of as that's how you are when you're out there, and so it was a big transformation in that way. And then from there, we moved to Germany, and I was quite unhappy. We talked about going to university in Germany and, a lot of beer drinking, that kind of stuff. And I wanted to go back to where I could run around and feel comfortable and all that. So I went back to Iowa by myself and started college there and went to Ames and been here ever since. And it was kind of by the Des Moines River here, which has been my home this river as my relationship to place. And so, then through that evolving, it was anti-war time. So I went from marching in ROTC, which is reserve officer training, where you're going to be an officer like my father, and then going, I'm learning more and more about what's going on in Vietnam, and going, I don't think I want to do this. I didn't like military life. I've been drinking with the airmen. I was old enough to kind of get into that group. And so I kind of saw a lot that I didn't really excited. And I was starting to hear stories about what was going on over there and how they were relating to their experiences. And so then that moved me off into the sandals and protesting the war. And pretty soon that was the period of the draft card where they were going to take you no matter what.
Yeah.
And so I burned my draft card and refused to serve. And so I was waiting to go to prison for that because I had friends that moved to Canada and I had everything. So it was a real schizophrenic time again in my life where I disconnected and trying to connect. And I'd made a group of friends there through these experiences. And I give you an example. I started out in math there because I really liked math. But by the time things go through in the university, I don't know what your experiences are, but it was TV lectures, 8:00 in the morning.
Yes.
And so by into my sophomore year, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm changing. So then I moved to sociology because I had a thing about all these cultures and all this experience that really fascinated by people, all the different ways that we relate to each other and what's important and the value systems and all that. So I was really excited by that. And so that's what I graduated in. And this group that I formed, or I didn't form, but together we moved out into a farmhouse outside of town. At that time, they were calling them communes, but it was just, 7, 8 steady people. And then there'd be people filtering through, coming and going. But it was another different kind of time of learning to get along with everyone. Who's going to wash the dishes? Who's going to take out the trash? Those kind of important things that we end up struggling over. Yes. And so that was a great experience. And then that kind of morphed into couples formed. And then it was not the best farmhouse. It was leaky, cold, all that. So we started moving out separately. And at that time, I'd been reading Thoreau. And so Thoreau really affected me deeply because it was a long perspective and yet part of the social being. And so it was interesting in that regards because after I graduated in the commune, we wanted to keep our independence sort of. So we started hauling garbage. We started working for a garbage company, and so that way we could switch off the days we didn't want to work with whoever within our group. And so it was really an easy life. And we got everything we needed out of the garbage. I could go on for an hour of just all the things that came out of that garbage. So you're getting a sociological view that is way beyond anything I learned in the university level. And so I kind of got, appreciated that tremendously. It was probably one of the most biggest experiences in a way in my life to look at my culture and look at the way we live and how we relate to all the things in our lives and stuff. So then that kind of changed. And like I said, then Paula, we moved over into the Des Moines River Valley, actually right into the timber edge. And we found a cabin that didn't have running water or electricity or anything. And so, we're going to go back to the land. We're going to get out of this crazy mad world, war, all that kind of stuff, and escape out into the woods. And so we did that. We got goats and chickens and we had coyotes in the yard. And it was just a whole different world for me. And I was learning my plants because what can I eat? I'm running around trying to figure out how to live out of that system that I found kind of scary. And so we did that for a number of years. And I think then Paula, she not only wanted to pursue a career more, we were doing construction together to make money. And then we didn't need much money, but that's how we get money. And then we living off the grid as much as we could. And so she decided, I think, more to go towards a family and back in town and pursue, because she was a very independent, very strong woman. And, the construction, one of the first women in construction and all this kind of stuff. So she ends up, going off in her past. She's managing a lumber store and stuff, so she pursued that and tremendous knowledge and fixing things. I mean, just incredible person. And so that kind of left me alone. And so then what I'm doing is I'm saving up my money, and then I would travel. I was just still fascinated by the world, out there. So I would take off, and I would. Some of my friends had moved to Canada to escape the war, and so I would go visit them. All right, and then I started going down to Mexico, and then I started going deeper into Mexico, and then it was Central America, and then it was like, all I wanted to do is get into wilderness. After a while, the people didn't interest me as much as that wilderness. I would go, like I said, my grandparents were in Florida, so I spent considerable time, month at a time, sometimes in the Everglades. That time it wasn't as restricted as it is now and stuff. So, and then boundary waters. I was lucky enough, one of the commune people and the friends had grown up. His parents had taken paddling in the boundary waters, which is one of the biggest wilderness areas in the central United States. So every year we were going there, and we'd go in for weeks at a time. And, that was a whole nother different way of relating to the world. And so you're learning, what can I eat here? Your mushrooms, things like that. And, you're dependent completely on yourself, what you bring with you. And so that was helped me as an individual feel better about myself and taking care of myself and things. And so that went on every year. We swore we'd never do a year that we didn't go back and do that. But then I started going other places. I became very fascinated by Native American time, how they did time. And there's archaeoastronomy was a new field at that time, and it was clocks, and they were finding them all over and marking all kinds of, just opened the world up. It was just like, oh my gosh,
Right.
It isn't savage people down here, they're way ahead of us in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I was really caught up in that. And so I traveled around looking at clocks, and that got to magical places I couldn't begin to describe. And so let's see, then that comes back. So I'm traveling. I run out of money. I come back. I work some and do that. And so pretty soon a job opened up down the road, like 1.5 miles at the state park. And I drove a person down to his interview on my construction crew. And they said, well, why don't you interview? And at that time, I've got pretty long hair and got a beard and pretty scraggly looking guy. And I said, I'm not here to get a job. Well, they need the practice. So you go in there. And the person, they found out I had a degree in sociology. I'd worked some criminology and stuff like that. And so they were looking for someone to run inmate crews. So I was hired on the spot, and it kind of,
Wow.
I didn't expect this. And, I felt like upsetting my friend who I drove down here to get the job.
Of course.
This kind of stuff. So it had all these layers to it, but it opened up a door because it was close to me. I could put the dog in the backpack. I had a little dog and ride my little motorcycle up to the park, and everything. And I'd already spent quite a few years sneaking into that park, staying home, doing things, like that. And I tried to look at it from a native person's eye, and how far can I walk in one day? And that became my home range. And so I went from going out looking for something to getting deeper to where I lived. And that was the big change, because then I began to really realize, wildness is right in front of me every minute, all the time. And so how do we use that to help us grow and be better human beings? So I've been really fortunate. Like I say, I'm still here in the valley, and I can't imagine going anywhere else, and I don't really even too excited about traveling anymore. COVID changed things, the plane, all that kind of stuff too. But I hitchhiked across the United States quite a few times, across Canada. That was my mode of travel. You kind of depended on what happens. You've opened your life up, which gets to the heart of rewilding, in that it was addressing fear. And I think that was my life, was learning how to be thrown in very scary situations, very unfamiliar, all that kind of stuff, and yet still being able to find myself. And so that's that's what rewilding is to me. It's like I'm having a conversation with the world now. It's not just who I feel safe with. It's not all that kind of level. It's opening myself up to not only internally who I am, but externally with other people, but also with the rest of the world, which is a lot bigger than people, let me tell you. So I'm learning conversation. And I think, this gets into, I tend to think about the United States and these other countries from a cultural, anthropological view. kind of tied to that. When I was in college, right, coming out of college, I became a janitor for the university. And that way I could go through all the people's books and artifacts and look through everything that I probably should have access to. But let me tell you, that's what fascinated me.
Wow.
And so I really could go deep into anthropology and archaeology on my own. And now those relationships of those professors I end up meeting, and getting to know years later, and telling them, "Oh yeah, I looked in your desk, all this kind of stuff." And yet, here's what you gave me, and we became great friends. We were inducted into Native societies together, and just had a lot of ceremonial things happen through all that. And so it sounds kind of weird what I'm saying, I know, but in another way, I think it was done with a good heart. And so it paid. The thing that came back to me was good, more heart.
Yes.
What more I could ask for than that. So, gosh, I could go into great depth. Like I say, at 76, I got a lot of stories that illustrate that stepping out of that human only perspective and trying to realize that we're all connected. And I looked at your CMM thing, and it's about communications and all that. And so, I believe a lot about internal communication. You have to learn about yourself.
Yes.
And that's really, the heart of this. And then you learn that through your experiences with other people. But actually, I think I've learned more by realizing those people are part of something bigger too.
Yeah.
And that's that wild world out there that is everywhere. It was in Tokyo. I could go on. I mean, that's why I can tell it one story, but we don't think of wildness necessarily in terms of step with other species. But let me tell you, there's a lot of other species in Japan, and they have a whole different relationship to temples and trees and rocks. And I mean, they have a whole different worldview. And so in some ways, it was much more like native understanding.
Yeah.
And that's where my path led me, was going through all these different groups of conservation. My career was 30 years in the Department of Natural Resources. I became the trail coordinator for the state of Iowa. So, in some ways, I'm one of the most successful grant writers I've ever seen. I don't need to keep them down. I'm running 6 and 7 crews across the state. We're doing restoration work, which wasn't being done. It was all managed people. And so we were resource prairie, just incredible stuff. And luckily, I run into some people off the crew. I just run into a young woman the other day, and I just started crying because she was telling me, here she is in this field of water quality and all this. And she said, "You don't know what you did for me. You have no idea." And I always thought it was funny because at that time, my speeches, I was giving quite a few presentations and stuff. And a lot of you didn't get asked back to. Because I was kind of on the edge there, and I'm going about the end of the world, because I wanted to get past all these ways of talking about how bad it all is and everything. So let's just go to the end of the world. You got cancer. Now what are you going to do? I mean, so now we can step out of the boxes that we've placed ourselves in and maybe look at doing something different. And I think a lot of them got it. And I don't know it all, but a lot of them did. And so, I could give dimensions to that. DNR fired me a couple times. Somebody's person was in the college class that I was teaching. And so they weren't happy because they were sleeping, and I woke them up and asked them to talk. And so they ran back to Dad, and they told us, "Hey, he's picking up all this stuff." So it was kind of has all these side things that I don't know if they explain things in one way, but I wasn't afraid to say what I wanted to say. And that's the only reason I could stay there. I had to be pursuing the very thing that I thought was important. And that's what grant writing did, because I never not got a grant. And they just kept bigger and bigger, because I just kept saying, "You wouldn't believe how bad it is. Oh my God, and where I lived was the worst." And so I wanted to use that as the example, and I never not got a grant. And so I was looking at trails and made a pretty good name in trails, because I wasn't looking at them as trails for people. I'm looking at them as corridors for wildlife to move along and being there and stuff. But it was more than human perspective to those trails. And so that was a different way of looking at it. And I would say things like, when I was building steps, and I said, they're not steps for people. They're erosion control devices that you can walk on so that you don't destroy what's there.
Yep,
Because it's all about what's here that's important. And that's why you're here, because you want to be immersed in that. You want to feel that.
Yeah.
And we have so much of that happens on an unconscious level,
Mm-hmm.
with that experience. Like I say, it's not urban or rural. There's not that kind of thing. It's, you can see what's going on in New York City in terms of birds and Audubon groups there, and identify these birds coming in, and coyotes and foxes downtown. I mean, all this kind of stuff is just pouring around. We just not really exposed to it too much. And so I really like the concept of rewilding, because like I said, I don't know what it means, but I know that's where I want to go.
Yeah.
Because I want that communication. I want that conversation with the whole world. And I'm so hungry for it. So I'm excited to be able to talk about it with you.
Yeah. Mark, I so appreciate you sharing all of that. And, when I kind of pitched you this conversation, I said, you bring the rewilding, I'll bring the communication perspective. So here's my attempt to do that. And that what I hear in your story is so many different opportunities that you created to kind of make a different choice and to kind of decide for yourself what had value and what had meaning to you. And that is an idea that resonates with me, because that is a part of taking a communication perspective, or being what we call CMM-ish, which is, just related to the CMM theory, because it's a very expansive theory. And so we like to think that there's lots of room to be CMM-ish is what we call it. But it's about meaning making. And that idea resonates with me so much. That's such a empowering idea to me, to realize that the meaning that we have is made by us. We get to have choices about what is meaningful to us. And so I think it's a helpful lens to use to say, okay, let's say, as a country in the United States, have a certain meaning around our relationship to nature, to wildlife. What kind of new meaning could we create? Having the understanding that that is a socially constructed meaning, that's something that is not necessarily innate. We can question it and look at it and say, is that working for us? Is that working for the animals? Is this working for the earth? And I would say the answer is no in a lot of ways. So then that's what opens us up to the opportunity to say, well, what do we want to be doing instead? And what kind of new meaning can we make here? What kind of new choices can we make? What new relationships and stories can we be telling? And so I see that in your story, that there's a lot of finding new ways to make meaning, I think, and finding new ways to relate to things, which is very cool. And then the other CMM-ish idea I see and hear you saying is about what we would call mystery and emergence. And like you're saying, we don't, even in this conversation, this hour-long conversation, we kind of both are trusting each other and showing up and saying, we don't know where it's going to go. We're just going to trust that we're going to create something really cool here. And it sounds like in your story, you were really embodying that. Also saying, I'm going to leave room for mystery to see what's going to emerge. And that in and of itself is what allows you to have such meaningful experiences and deep relationships, like you said, not just with people and places, but with nature and experiences too.
Well, good. The little bit I've read about the CMM thing, that's our conversations anymore are breaking out into two groups or whatever. They're getting pretty schizophrenic here. And so I think communication is really important. And I think what helps me communicate better individually with people is my conversations and relationships with more than human.
Yeah.
Because they really help me listen to and go in depth with who I'm engaged with. Yeah. Even myself, I don't want to forget, because I keep thinking I know who I am, and then things come along and okay, guess I got more to go here. So, and I learned to like that. I like not knowing what people are going to say and do and where. That's why this conversation is so important. I can't wait to see where you take me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yes. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I know that we've both said that we're still learning. We're always still learning. But what is rewilding? How do you think of rewilding?
Well, taking it to that conversing with each other and communicating, the communication goes to the world. So rewilding is about how do I learn to listen to the world? How do I get out of the boxes I keep placing myself in? And so rewilding has been a wonderful thing for me, and in a big part because I was doing this analysis of where I live, and then I'm adding up what land use is taking place in, like, for example, 2/3 of 36 million acres in Iowa is two annual species that require tremendous amounts of petroleum, pesticides, herbicides, fertilizer. I mean, it's just horrible how much poison is going on out there, and land use. So that's based on, as I understood more with ecology, the science of ecology is saying, more diversity, the healthier the ecosystem. And the healthier the ecosystem, the healthier the individuals. And that's what I think that kind of sums it all up, because it's whether you're talking about the wide world, more than human, the ecosystem, whatever, those are just ways of talking. But, otherwise we put these artificial divisions in there between us internally, us humans, us cultures, us countries, us, how we define our relationships. And so, I think rewilding has been the most, if I have to use the word hopeful, which I avoid usually, but it's the most hopeful thing I know, because I know we can't keep going the direction we're going. Like for Iowa, for example, we use 98% of it. Where are you going to go there? You keep nothing left to keep going that direction. Yeah. And then, when I move to the worldwide perspective and I go, we're in the highest extinction rate in 65 million years. That's before humans. And so we have no comprehension of what that means. We have no clue whatsoever. And now the conversation has moved to climate. And I think that's interesting. But climate is by far a shallower discussion to me. That's like something down the road. We can do that. We can build green energy. We can, all that kind of approach to it is using the same mindset, the same economic perspective of the world. And so, how do we get out of that box so we can really make better decisions? And so if you don't include the rest of the world in that decision, you're not going to get very far, as far as I'm concerned. And that's what I like about rewilding. So you can take that concept, and there's people doing this all over the world now. It's been funny just because I think we're realizing how devastating our cultures have been to these places.
Yes.
And we're surviving. Like Iowa, we import 85% of the food we eat here in Iowa, and we say we're feeding the world, but we're doing it with 2 or 3 species.
Right.
And so it's just ironic that we look at it that way, because we wouldn't survive if we didn't bring this food in from somewhere else, which is pretty much true anywhere you live anymore.
Sure.
So, I have trouble dividing out the cities, the rural and urban areas. I think that's a false dichotomy too. We're all in the same world. We're in the same boat.
Yeah.
When you start doing those things, your choices and your opportunities to do something better get very limited. And that's the same in the conversation we're having. If I tell you what the reality is, that's what I'm saying. I don't know what rewilding is, but I'm excited to have the conversation with you, because we all got to be figuring out what that means. And so that's what rewilding does for me. A lot of people, I have a lot of Native friends, and they just do not like that word. They want to go matriarchy, rematriarch the world, which is, to me, growing up was ecofeminism, which I'm very, how I went. Men have got a different approach to things, and it's about time we let some other view of how to do things come in.
Right.
And so I'm a very big feminist in that regards, but now they wouldn't like that word either. They would like rematriarchy, because that's their cultural understanding of it. And I think they also, for me, the reason I go there and work better there is because they are saying, they have a culture that says all my relations. So it isn't just humans, and we have different ways of illustrating that to what Native people do. But it's like saying they weren't here before we got here, too.
Yes.
And no, they've been here a long time, and they've been pretty good for thousands of years. We've only been here a couple hundred, so maybe we have something to learn here. And so,
Yeah.
in the language that they use, the concepts that they use are much more inclusive, and
Yeah.
that appeals to me.
That's
So
part of
I
that meaning making that I'm seeing in terms of, that you were kind of exposed to in a unique way by moving so much and living so many different places, is that you can see how different cultures or different groups of people make meaning. And so you're kind of exposed to all these different ways of being. And then you can see yourself as, being able to choose or learn from other people. And that's, again, part of taking a communication perspective, or why the theory is called CMM, coordinated management of meaning, is that it's coordinating our ways of being with each other. It's not us versus them. It's not, we're better and you're worse, or we're progressed further and that's better. It's, how are we coordinating these ways of being together in a way that works for all of us? And obviously, when we're talking about that in communication, we're talking about people coordinating two different ways of being of people, but it applies, like you're saying, to these relationships we have with nature as well, coordinating these ways of being. Something that interests me is how we can see ourselves as participants in rewilding efforts, or, in an ecosystem, because like you're saying, a lot of people see themselves as removed. Okay, there's nature and then there's
right.
human beings, but we're just as much a part of that. So for you, what do you think changes when people start to see themselves as participants in that system?
Well, getting back to what does the word mean, I read something one time that talked about wildness is what digests your food. It's what, if you weren't wild, you would be dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
And dead is even a form of wildness because it's decay and you're feeding other things. So again, you've broken down more walls of how we define ourselves. And so when I think of that wildness, that opened that up, but that's also true of the more than human. I'm finding out, like, I'll give you one example. I've been out lately. We have a cougar that's down by the river somewhere. People have gotten some shot, and I'm out looking for it, because I don't work off the fear. And I think that if I had to boil down everything into it, culture is based on fear, this culture especially. And we're afraid of other people. We're afraid of ourselves. We're afraid of the world out there.
Yeah.
And I like to make the joke here in Iowa, our grizzly bears are ticks because everybody's afraid to go in the woods because they're going to get a tick bite and get sick.
Yeah.
So that fear, snakes, rattlesnake, whatever, that fear has dissipated so much for me. It's not that I still don't have fear, but it's not controlling me as much. And that's why I'm easy to step out into other cultures and other ways of talking about the world and spirituality. I could talk, forever about that in a different way. And so I've kind of lost this fear of that. And that is rewilding to me.
Yeah.
That is the heart of rewilding is how do we have a relationship with who we're with, where we're at, with ourselves, with everything around us, our food, everything. I mean, so that's been the best. If I could offer that up to anybody, that would be what I would offer. Because getting rid of fear is like, man, the world is magical. I mean, it's just fun.
Yeah.
There's so much to it that comes out of not being afraid of people. Yeah.
Well, I think hearing your story and your perspective is really important and cool for me, because when I kind of look at my generation, especially, I think that, doing some of the things that you living off the grid, is kind of trendy, sounds kind of cool. People like how that sounds.
Right.
But a lot less people actually do it and make it happen for themselves. And so I think that's kind of my question is there of how do we get from idea to action, or from, our imagination to embodying these things that we say we value? How can we actually live it out? Because I can learn about rewilding. So I feel like I'm in this kind of first phase. I'm learning about rewilding and gaining an awareness of that. I'm trying to understand more about, the native species in the area that I'm in, and what does biodiversity look like, and kind of learning all of these new things. And that's awesome. And then that begs a new question of, okay, where do we go from here? How do you take actual action around it? And so that's what I think your story is kind of helping to share, or helping to answer that question for me of, what does it look like to
take real action around that?
Let me give you one example. I'll use the example that you brought up about, it's kind of trendy to live off the grid. And, because we're realizing we're going to have to do things differently.
Yeah.
And I think we're looking for connection because our connections are dissipating and becoming struggling. And so we're searching for that kind of thing. And so one way to put that in perspective is, this is the wildest time ever in human history. Ever. Nothing. We have no idea. We've never been here. No one's ever been here. So you can't just go back. We're going to have to figure out, how do you go forward? Well, you don't go forward. You figure out where you're at, where you want to live. and that's what going, off the grid means, I think, to people.
Yeah.
You form these bonds with people and stuff. And so just keep that in perspective that, it's the wildest time ever now. We are so never been here. We have no idea where to go. And we're knowing we can't continue doing a lot of things we're doing. That we could analyze our culture, a lot of different ways through economic perspective, And I think the biggest part, let me tie this together, ecology. Ecology is really important to me because it's saying, what are the value systems that we use to relate to ourselves, to others, and to the more than human world. And you break it down usually into, most people think of instrumentally. How does this going to help me? How am I going to feed all this kind of, and then how am I going to get along with someone over here? And how am I going to not be terrified out here in the woods? How am I going to be living out this way? And all that, is a fear-based perspective to me. And then, so you get back to, I think, animal rights. You can talk about a lot of different ways, but when you start giving value, intrinsic value, everything has value in and of itself, irregardless of you, because it's like, you got to have something to digest your food, and it isn't you. It's wildness. It's something else. And so now we're big on probiotics, and we're all talking about vitamins. But the latest thing I've been reading about food, we went through all the thing about eating meat, people in the past living off meat and how important diet and vegetable, all that stuff. And what they found out was it's the more diversity in your food is what gives you longer life. And that's prove everything. That's That's it. That's the heart of it all. The more diversity, the healthier we're all going to be. And so I try to keep that in mind as I don't know the answers. So how do I give intrinsic value to otherness as I have to learn from them? Because that's what I am. I'm them. I am I am these things. I am urban. I am rural. Anyway. I'm very privileged. And that's one of the hardest ones I struggle with, because then we step back into the social human definitions of how we're going to function. And now we've got, Palestine and Israel and all these things going on. And I don't know, those are the things that weigh, those are fear-based things. I need to have a place that isn't fear-based, because the real world is not fear-based. It's just wild.
I like that. What you're kind of saying, or what I'm hearing you say, is that, wildness is everything. And what you just, I am everything. I am nature. I am all of these things. And so I'm curious about what it means, or what it can do for people to understand how is wildness, how is rewilding, how is conservation and nature and how is it related to everything?
Well, one good dimension to that, and I think this especially is important for you, I think with young people, I immediately, I think that's what the 60s and that representation of that old culture of war and controlling, and then anti-war, and then you start looking, that's when things really broke open, feminism, environmentalism, all these things we started questioning and looking at and trying to refigure. And I think that's really critical thinking is extremely important. And so how do we bring that forward into thing? And I wrote grants for AmeriCorps. I don't know if you're a Peace Corps in the United States, AmeriCorps, and it's mostly younger people. And I ran hundreds of people through that program. And I would always give them the end of the world speech to begin with, which threw them for a loop. But like I say, I think the more they got to understand me and the work that we were doing, they better understood what that meant, because, we need to work with everything that's out there. And we've pretty well, manipulated and converted a lot of it into monoculture kind of thinking. And we need to step out of that. And so I felt so fortunate to be around young people. I still, like I said, the greatest reward I have is still running into these people that come up to me and go, I don't know if you remember me, but you wouldn't believe what you did. And it's just, that just melts me, because it meant that they were hearing something at that age that I would have appreciated hearing more at that age. And so I think young people, we look, you're the ones that are facing a lot of this, that us old people are going, well, not going to get me,
Yeah.
But in another way, that's a false way to look at it. But I think young people symbolize a whole big thing to me. And being 76 years old, I'm still a young person in some ways, because I'm still not going to let fear control my life and my decisions. I think that's the only thing I really have to ever offer anybody, especially young people, is, you don't know where life's going. Don't be afraid. Follow your heart. You'll be fine.
What's really compelling to me is this truth at the center of all this, that it's about the relationships. And, in different things that I've read from you or listening to other podcasts you've been on, kind of this idea of like, how do we save ourselves through rewilding, and thinking about that dichotomy between hope and fear. It's like we've always been asking ourselves the question of how do we save ourselves? And when we answer that question coming from a place of fear, it looks like isolating ourselves. It looks like disconnecting from nature. It looks like, hoarding the resources and not sharing and not seeing yourself as part of a relationship or a system, and really going into this kind of like self-preservation mode. I think if we answer the question of how do we save ourselves from a place of hope, that's when it looks like rewilding and relationships, and we save ourselves through saving the planet and saving the diversity that we have. And so it's, understanding ourselves as connected in that kind of way, that our own liberation, our own well-being happens with the well-being of the planet as well.
Well said. Well said. And I think COVID really, taught us a lot. That was a good thing, because we isolated, and yet in another way we went deeper. And, we started looking. Got to have a pet. I got to have some other being I can relate to. I got to look out the window. I got to see some birds. So there was. So it's never a binary one or the other thing. I've learned that it's a flow of life. It's just the flow. And at times it gets stuck, and times it rushes, and all that. But it's life, and I think that's one of the things of old age, is when you reflect back on your life and you look at the flow, you go, wow, I could have never figured out this was where things had gone. It's a very exciting time. It's an exciting time. Now, I think it reminds me back of the 60s, because we've come to a point where things are pretty scary. And what world do you want to live in? You want to be scared, or you want to be healing? You're healing everything else out there.
I one thing that's sticking with me from the story you shared, at the very beginning of our conversation, is that you were able to travel and see so many beautiful things. And then it kind of something, changed. And I don't know exactly what you would call that within yourself, but when you kind of found a home in Iowa and decided, oh, well, look how much is right here for me to see. You said, you're not as interested in travel anymore. And that's interesting to me, because I also created the opportunity for myself to travel in Europe for 6 months after I graduated. And it was amazing. And I loved it. And I'm excited to do more travel. But there was also a part of me that when I came home saying, oh, when can I go back? I just want to, keep seeing amazing things. But obviously that's very expensive to travel around the world. And so I kind of came to this conclusion of, well, let me remind myself that there's beauty and amazing things right here at home, in my home of Indiana or in the United States. It's just, when we see ourselves as so disconnected from nature, it can feel like, okay, I gotta, fly to a different country and go find a big mountain to hike in when it's like you obviously know, there's so many wonderful state parks in every state in the United States, and there's opportunities to connect with nature. And like we have a state park like 20 minutes away from me. And I grew up in this area and I never knew it was there until this year. And I went and I thought, this is incredible. And it's one of my favorite places to be now because you can be so connected to nature and be a part of it yourself. But yeah, I just think that's such a big part of it, of kind of looking in your own backyard and seeing what's the nature there and what's the role you can have there.
Yeah, we could talk quite depth of that because as young people, that's what I saw. People on the cruise, they couldn't wait to go somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like the same one I was saying about the draft story. I had friends that go, well, I'm not going to serve, so I'm moving to Canada. And they moved to the wildest places in Canada. I'm still a friend. I go every other year, Vancouver Island. And oh my gosh, a little fishing village, old growth forest. And yet he's always upset because there's some development coming in. There's some thing that's just like makes him cry, and I always used to tease him. I said, well, that's because you ran away. You should have stayed here on the front line. Because in Iowa, the most biologically altered state in North America, is where else would you want to be? And that's what I'm learning about the wildness. The wildness is not just externally in a state park with artificial lines and a little area we've allowed to heal a little bit, because that's where I started that career. Yes. It's realizing that, the wildness is in your stomach. It's your mind that's not wild. And that's what traveling exposes to. And you get self-confidence and you go, oh, wow, I've learned so much. And, I'm finding out who I am and I'm seeing all this different stuff. But that's always true sitting here in the chair where I am right now. I'm going through that process right in my mind. You're doing that right now too. Yeah. I hope I can help that.
Absolutely. And just a funny little thing you made me think of talking about the arbitrary lines of the state park is that there's a section on the highway here in Indiana, and in the kind of median, it's, plants. And there's a sign that says, native species. And at first I'm like, oh, that's so cool. And then I'm like, this is a block in the middle of the highway. Like, what good is this doing any of us? But maybe it's the first step, into a very, very beginning of rewilding the middle of the highway. Obviously is kind of missing the point a little bit, but it is interesting and cool to see the different native species, and you have to start somewhere, I guess.
Your mind did. That's what you're laughing at the sign.
Yes, right.
Your mind went wild.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, you mentioned that Iowa is the most, what is it? Biologically altered. Okay, yes, biologically altered. So I'm wondering, can you tell us a little more about Iowa's biodiversity?
Well, that's what, when I moved here and I started trying to analyze, I was very fortunate because I moved over by the river. So everything else is corn and beans. I mean, nothing is left but those river corridors. Yeah. And now the water is so polluted. I mean, I could go on forever about how horrible it is. And I think it's important to do that. That's the end of the world speech, because you can't keep doing this. You can't eat the fish out of the river. You can't swim in the river. You can't go kayaking. You can't let your dog in the river. Wow. You see what I mean? So it's become, and then the airs, all these poisons are spraying, and every year, on and on. It's like the fires. I don't know if you had smoke coming with your fires.
Yes.
It's just, you can see it, you can feel it. And then with age, you realize that, well, wait, where's all those birds? Where'd they go? What? There's no bugs on my windshield. There's no, there's less and less diversity everywhere I look. And so I can go really depressed and I can go scream and yell and protest and all. And I do all that. And I think it's a good thing to do. Yeah. But at the same time, I have to understand my place in the bigger thing, because, nature is a human construct, and we can analyze it and talk about it, biodiversity and all these terms. But wildness is way beyond anything we can think about. I mean, it's just, it's not a thing. It's not an object. It's not a place. It's how the world works. Yeah. And it's kind of letting go of that control of trying to control everything and put a sign on it and say, here's some native diversity, you see. And so, it's stepping out of that artificial human clamp down on something so that we think we can decide what's better. And part of us, we still have to do that. I don't mean you don't do some of that, but I just mean that isn't all of it. Some of it you have to have some faith in that the world takes care of itself with or without you, and so,
Yes.
That's a freedom that we need to cultivate within ourselves, because it's not about control. And the more we try to control it, the more problems we cause ourselves, I think.
Yeah.
So how do we facilitate that wildness? And you can feel it when you go to the state park, and you can laugh about it when you see it in the middle of the road.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's really it. Mind is starting to become wild, and the wilder it is, I think the healthier you'll feel, and the healthier you'll understand what direction to go in with your life, what to do. And so mine led to, okay, how can I restore what was here? And then I realized I'll never restore what was here. So how can I make where I want to live here now? And that's what my life has become. And boy, I couldn't ask for anything more than that. I mean, I'm such fortunate, privileged, lucky white guy. I can't tell you. It's a burden to carry.
Yeah. Well, I know on your on the Be Wild, Rewild website, I've seen this language of, trust wildness, and that seemed to be a real kind of founding idea for the creation of that project. So that seems, when I first read that on your website, I had one understanding of what that meant. And now talking to you, it has another level that is trust a wildness within yourself. But I wonder if you could share a little bit more about that. What does it mean, or what does it look like to trust wildness, to really trust wildness in yourself and in the world?
Well, I think I've been trying to give examples of that, of where I realized that, okay, I'm going to get fired. Okay. Oh, okay. I mean, there's things more important than that. And I think young people look at jobs now like that. They're moving constantly. They have a lot more openness about moving around and jumping before. So, oh God, I got to stay here. I'm going to lose my whatever, and all that. And so again, security, the fear of something.
Yes.
And so, once I learned to trust the wildness of my life, it's always been quite bountiful. It's always been more than I ever could have imagined. I'm the luckiest guy in the world, living in the wildest place in the world. And I think learning to live that way is very important, especially the way things are now, especially because it's so fear dominated. And education wise. And, I remember we said, put a sign on a tree explaining the tree, and they ripped the bark all off the tree and the tree died. So it's like, okay, maybe signage in the park isn't the best way to go. It's just letting them run wild out there, get dirty, roll in the mud, whatever.
Yeah.
So that started me down that path. If we don't have to have an answer, we have to be open to the question. And that's why we say you go to a park, it's not even on a conscious level. You just know, well, the air's better. My attention is different. I'm not looking at a screen. I'm not bent my head down. Physically, you're moving. There's all these different dimensions to it that we don't consciously give credit to, but we know on some level. And so how do we learn to talk to ourselves? How do we learn to listen to ourselves telling us, wait, this feels pretty good. It's so temporary. It isn't just for a quick movie. It isn't a quick ice cream cone. It's, wait, this went deeper than that. This made me want to be with other people that like this stuff. And so we together, and we can now go out and go camping, and we can go paddling, and we can, share those deeper things. And, all that happens really on a not conscious level. I mean, or we don't acknowledge it that way even.
Yeah.
That's a big thing to learn, I think. Just trusting that wildness it's almost, I guess you could say it's a religion for me, but it's a spiritual quest. I think that I still working. And, as you get older, you start thinking about death, and you start thinking about your friends are dying, and your family, and, your pets, and all those different ways. And yet I feel, man, I've been so lucky up to this point. What the heck? I mean, can't wait to see where this goes. So that's another way I think, as I'm personally looking at people dying.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and the world dying around me. I mean, that's
Yes,
another
great
thing. I
point.
have to get out of that. This is, the world's changing, that's for sure. And it will take care of itself, but that doesn't let me off the hook. I still have to do what my heart's telling me to help it heal or to help it
Yeah.
go on a while. And that's what I work at. That's the only thing I can. I retired quite a while ago, and I keep getting drugged back in by people like you that bring me
Yes.
back. And so I'm fortunate. I feel so fortunate that that's still of an interest, and people do that.
Yeah.
But more and more, I'm kind of, I'm not out to push anything.
Yeah. Well, I like how you describe it as almost like a practice or a way of being in the world. And again, that's why I want to talk about taking a communication perspective or having a communication practice is there a mindfulness practice, all these things I see that go hand in hand is that communication is not just something we do. And maybe you would say, rewilding is not just something we do. It's not an act. It's not just, planting a native species.
That's right. In fact, the
It's
biggest
so much
opposite
more.
to rewilding is people that want to go back and make it something.
Yeah.
And it's like, good luck. Invasive species are
yes.
taking over the world. Relax. Don't you think you're an invasive species?
Yes.
How do we divide the world out like that? We do these false binaries and then we end up afraid, or
Yeah.
controlled.
Yeah.
And not that you don't do those things, not that you don't. I've spent my career working on facilitating native species, maintaining and wildness, all that. So it's not that. It's not a false choice here. It's just a way of looking at it.
Yeah. And it's when I hear you talk about trusting wildness, it sounds like another way to say what I talked about at the beginning of this conversation is leaving room for mystery. And again, that's just the way that you are showing up to the world is with that in mind and with that as part of your perspective. And yeah, again, that in and of itself creates opportunities for so much to happen that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And so it matters. But I think it's kind of a invisible thing to people, or it feels really abstract. And I think that's what, is hard for people to grasp is that unless they're maybe like you really, really in it, then it's hard to take that step into it. Do you see that happening? Is that?
I'll give you one way of looking at it is children.
Mm-hmm.
Look at a child. A child is wild. A child is, captivates you. You're drawn to children because they're expressing that trusting of wildness. They're learning in the world. They're at your mercy, or however you want to say it, and you want to protect them, you want to take care of them. But another way, they're just going to keep going, And so that wildness in there, you learn to trust that child. And I think we're fascinated by children. I think that's why people want to have children.
Mm-hmm.
Is because it lets you step out of yourself and look back at that part that wasn't afraid and so exciting. And we do that with pets too. We do it with lots of other beings. But that wildness thing it's a hard thing to express. I guess that's why I don't even know still how to talk about it in some way.
Right.
But I know how it makes me feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm learning more and more to look at my feelings. And I think, again, back to young people, you're looking for your wildness. You've grown up enough to now you're getting encased in this culture, in this world. Now I want to go to Europe. I want to go see the world.
Yes.
I want to get out of this box I'm in.
Yeah.
And you should. But I think, again, you can get out of the box anywhere you are. And that's the heart of it. I mean, that's what we learn in our travels, and they're important. And I wouldn't say don't do it. But another way, I've gotten to the point where I just couldn't get to wilderness enough and be there long enough. I just couldn't do it. And then I realized, well, that isn't exact. I mean, now I know what's there. I get the feel. I get it. I know now. And so I'm going to grab that and take it with me wherever I go. Yeah. And that's the gift of it all, I think. Mm-hmm. It doesn't get any wilder than this right now, ever.
Yeah. Yes.
And we don't know what that means.
Yeah.
It could be scary. And it is scary in some ways. In another way, it's life. It just goes on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the things, some of the language we use in CMM is to talk about creating better social worlds, which kind of feels like where we're ending in this conversation is that if we've talked about the stories we have been telling or what we have been making, and then kind of deciding, is that what we want to keep making, or is those the stories we want to keep telling, or would we like to tell some new stories? That's kind of this question that gets us to look toward the future. And like you said, this is the beginning of a conversation. This is not the end all be all. This is a, an invitation in, and then hopefully can generate just more conversations and more in people embracing wildness within themselves and their lives, and finding ways to practice rewilding, or however you would say that. And so I definitely see, everything you've talked about today, rewilding and trusting wildness as part of creating better social worlds for ourselves. And again, it's about us being participants in our social worlds, that we actually do have that power. You're saying, okay, look at where we are. We can't keep going on how we have been. So how do we create a better social world? Not only for ourselves, but for the planet, for nature, for things that are beyond human too.
Yeah, and I can give you a perfect example of that when I had to think about what we were going to say here and everything. And I thought the biggest thing I really do that separates me from most people and most things is I say, I'm here to represent the frog. And so I had my little frog pin on today because I wanted to be sure and say, if we don't include the rest of the world at this table, at this conversation, it's not a very good conversation.
Yeah.
It's a very shallow conversation. And so I want to know how to always bring that otherness into the room, into the conversation. And I think that's really difficult for us. Our language is not set up that way. Our culture is not set up that way. Our way of thinking is not set up. But to me, that's the heart of a human being. It's the human being includes the rest of the world, because you're not alone. It's not just about you. So that's really important. And that's the most important thing. And I know I throw most people there off because I have stood up in many of me. I just went to the biggest environmental meeting in the state of Iowa, and they asked for my opinion. And I said, well, it's great, but I don't see one frog in the room here. And I meant that, as an allegory or something, in that we've talked all about the human legislatures and laws and parks, and we talked about all that stuff, but we never talked about the other species being represented. And so a big change that hit my life was we had the International Environmental Ethics Conference in Iowa before anybody knew what that even meant.
Yes.
So we went and had that, and we had Council of All Beings, and it was a 3-day prep thing to where we made masks, and we tried to learn about one species, and we realized that we all have a species. So we all have some bird. We all have something in our life that we've connected to. And a frog was a big one for me because it's a person in two worlds. It's a being living in two worlds. And Native people gave me a language, two hawks watching. And it was because they said, you're so good at having two views of things. It's like you're using both eyes. They had all this, and it was so, it just made me cry. It was so touching because, and I could acknowledge that, we need that otherness to recognize them part of us to figure out who we are. Mm-hmm. And if we don't have them in us, when we're doing that, we've limited ourselves and our understanding of ourselves and our relationship to where we are. So, that's the biggest thing. And that Council of All Beings just changed my life. I mean, it changed. Wow. It was like we formed bonds that I've never formed with other people because they weren't being just people. They had their own other thing they wanted to speak for. And that was really powerful stuff.
Wow. Well, Mark, I so appreciate your time and your perspective today. Is there anything else you want to share as we kind of wrap up our conversation?
Just thank you for pursuing this conversation about communication, because we tend to limit what that word means. We don't understand really. Communication happens non-verbally. It happens all these different ways. And we need to understand how to communicate. It seems to be deteriorating as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Because you've really helped me rethink about a lot of things a lot differently now too, and how to better communicate. So really you've been the help for me today, so thank you for that. That's helped. I haven't had to sit down like this for a while and do this.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. Thanks for saying that. And I feel excited. And it makes sense to me that, the name of the podcast is Stories Lived, Stories Told. And if I could just take a second to explain where that comes from, is that there's a model within the theory of CMM called the LUUT model, LUUUUTT. And that's L for lived stories, and then the T at the end is told stories. So that's where the name of the podcast comes from. But then it's saying in between that are all these other kinds of stories. And the U's represent things like untold stories, unheard stories, untellable stories. So it's like, yes, there are stories we tell, and they do differ from the stories we live because we're attaching meaning to them. But then what happens when we start looking at all those other stories that aren't getting told? And so I kind of see rewilding through that lens of what are the untold stories that we're not hearing, and what are the untold stories that we could start telling, and what changes when we start telling those stories. And so to me, it just is all about stories. And I appreciate, the stories you've been able to share today. And I'm hopeful, and the way I see it is that this conversation is part of telling a new story around our relationship to wildness.
Good. I'm so happy to share what it's done for me. I have a hard time expressing it, but I'm the luckiest guy in the world, So
Yeah.
Thank you for adding to that.
Okay, that is all for our conversation with Mark. One thing I'll go ahead and point out is that if you'd like to be a part of this conversation with Mark, there's a Facebook group that he runs that you can join, which I will include a link to in the show notes. At the end of each episode, I like to offer some questions to reflect on. This acts as a next turn, so the conversation doesn't stop when the episode does. Today, the questions I would have you think about based on this conversation are, how can you embrace wildness in yourself? And what opportunities do you have to experience nature, beauty, and wilderness in your own backyard? You are welcome to reach out to me to share your reflections to these questions, as well as any questions of your own or ideas that you have. You can do that through email, the website, or by commenting on Instagram and YouTube. The reason I invite you to share your reflections with me is to stay in dialogue. Other great ways to keep dialogue going is to follow the show wherever you listen, leave a rating and review, and most importantly, share episodes that mean something to you with others. Especially because I am doing series this year and really concentrating on using a communication perspective on a wide, diverse array of topics. I think that widens the opportunity to invite people in. I am supported by the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. This podcast is just one of many initiatives designed to create space for more conversations that move us toward those better social worlds we hope to create. I'll go ahead and mention specifically one of the other initiatives of the CMM Institute, and that is the line of Cosmo activities. It's an educational series of mainly social emotional learning resources, and they're all available at our new website, which is www.cosmoactivities.com. There's really great resources for kids of all ages, and we're currently working on developing a Cosmo Parents activity, which if you'd like to be a part of that, you're welcome to fill out our survey, which can be found in the show notes and also at the website, www.cosmoactivities.com. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious, and thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abbie, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.